Titus Grown is the first book in the Gormenghast trilogy, and it was written by Mervyn Peake and published in 1946. It is one of the most famous gothic horror novels out there, gothic fantasy novels out there, and it took me about 3 months to read. Now, usually it takes me about like a week and a half to read something of that size, definitely. But this took me about 3 months to read, and we'll get to why soon. But what is Gormenghast? As a trilogy, as an idea, as a concept, Titus Grown is about, I would say, two main things. It's about its setting, and it's about its characters. The setting is Gormenghast Castle, which is almost a character in itself. It feels alive. It's this just like huge, like almost labyrinthine structure that like kind of topples in on itself and grows into itself. And there are quite literally like thousands of rooms in this castle, and the occupants of the castle only know about certain parts of the castle, and maybe they like once upon a time went to different aspects, different parts of the castle, but now they've forgotten how to get there. And then there are rooms and areas of the castle that they've just never been to begin with. And that is the setting. It is described in a very unique way that evokes melancholic imagery, just this emotion of aching sadness. And there is a lord of that castle, Lord Sepulchrave. And I forget exactly what it is, but it's like, he's the 70th Lord of Gormenghast, and his infant son, Titus Grown, hence the name of the book, is born at the beginning of the book. And though he's born at the beginning of the book, and though the book is named after him, he is very much not really a character presence because he's an infant throughout the entire book. But there are a lot of events and character actions that are taken around Titus or because of Titus. And it is a book about the characters who live in Gormenghast, and to a much lesser extent, the characters who live around Gormenghast Castle and the villages that surround Gormenghast Castle. The prose of Gormenghast are gorgeous, and not in the sense that I usually would think of like gorgeous prose. There's like Lord Dunsany, King of Elfland's Daughter, which is like this oniric, dreamlike prose. And then there is Guy Gavriel Kay, which is who I usually think of, like this rhythmic, poetic quality. Mervyn Peake's prose are not like either of those. He takes painstaking time to describe things that I'm not sure I've ever seen another author take the time to describe. He'll describe everyday actions, everyday objects, with the description that most writers would reserve for a grand city wall, or like a citadel that's just richly adorned and stuff like that. He'll reserve for very mundane actions, and yet everything seems intentional. It's not like a Jordanian style of description, like with Robert Jordan, how he'll describe, a tavern in real time for like 3 or 4 pages or something like that. It's not like that. Each line of description feels like it has earned its place to be there, that it deserves to be there. And the feeling that you get from like these descriptions of these very minuscule, mundane things, is the feeling of the melancholic, but also this deep aching sadness that I was describing earlier. He puts a sense of meaning to a lot of things that I never really would have considered had any sense of meaning. And it's gorgeous. It's dark, but not in a brutal way. But instead in a way that feels, I don't even know how to describe it. It just feels like every single thing in this story has meaning, even down to the barest of actions and the barest of objects. And his prose, this took me, as I said, about like 3 months to get through. And I would stop reading for like 2 weeks or 3 weeks at a time, but there was something about it. Something about Gormenghast that had me coming back again and again and again. And I think a large part of that something was the prose. The plot of Gormenghast is what took me so long. The first half of Gormenghast, or rather Titus Groan, is what I would almost term plotless. It lacks a plot. The second half has a very minuscule plot, a very like just gradual, very small plot, and that is entirely intentional on Mervyn Peake's part. And even though I was very often bored by Gormenghast, and it was dense and it was hard to get through, even despite all of that, I couldn't help but think about the time when this was published. This was published in 1946, and it's possible I'm being a little bit presumptuous, but I don't think I'm too far off the mark. Soldiers in 1946 were returning home from a catastrophic, traumatic experience. And even like 20 years later, and even like 10 years later when Lord of the Rings was published, fantasy was very much an escapist genre by virtue of showing kind of the glories of battle and like people conquering other people in these political machinations and just these wars and stuff like that. And nowadays, like fantasy now is very much like plot forward and plot driven and like character driven. And all of those things, I think, are perhaps more of an escapist fantasy geared towards solving or dealing with mundanity. If your life at work or anything like that is mundane, it's boring, it's, day after day, then in your escapist fantasy, you're going to crave something that is a lot more exciting. But after World War II, I can't help but wonder whether the escapist fantasy was a lot more of what Gormenghast was offering. Whether it was a lot more about finding comfort in beauty and comfort and beauty in the mundane, in the everyday, in this sense of like these residents at Gormenghast Castle just are constantly doing the same things over and over again. And maybe that is the escapist fantasy. And so I think Gormenghast and Titus Groan is representative in a fascinating way of a time in the fantasy genre where the escapist element was actually finding solace in everyday rituals, in everyday things. And yet, Gormenghast, as I mentioned, Gormenghast deals with everyday things and deals with everyday rituals. But it has this undertone of aching sadness and aching melancholy. And perhaps that was something that soldiers felt exploring or coming back from World War II. However, the second part of the book does have a semblance of a plot, and it is driven by a young kitchen staff member named Steerpike. And he basically is ambitious. He wants to rise up through the ranks, and via his ambition, he begins to provoke a little bit of change in the in Gormenghast Castle. And that is a major theme at play here. There are themes of the beauty of the everyday, but there are also themes of the inevitability of change. And change here is not treated really as a good or a bad thing. It is, however, treated as something that's inevitable. Similarly, I think a lot of authors and a lot of people would portray Steerpike's ambition as this sort of negative or bad thing. But I didn't really interpret it that way. I didn't really interpret that's what Mervyn Peake was trying to say. I don't think Steerpike, even though he kind of operates in an antagonistic function, I don't think Steerpike is either good nor bad. I do think, however, that he's inevitable. Or him or somebody like him would come along to Gormenghast Castle and shake things up, and that they could not sit in their, comfortable, everyday, ritualistic existence for forever. And so he is inevitable. The characters of Titus Groan are, along with the setting, the main focus here. There are two different groups of characters. One group operates outside of the castle, in the villages. And these characters are a lot more along the lines of what I think a lot of people would expect from fantasy characters. They're very normal. There's a subplot that goes on over there that is kind of this romantic, tragic romantic subplot, and it deals a lot with these passions of romantic love. And that is juxtaposed with the kind of subliminal, emotional aching that is in the main castle of Gormenghast. And I find that Mervyn Peake's ability to deal with both a subliminal emotional depth to his prose and to his characters, and juxtapose that to a much more raw, visceral emotion that's present in the villages outside of Gormenghast, is very well done, and quite impressive that he's able to do both of them. But that's the one group of the characters. The second group of characters inhabits Gormenghast Castle. And these characters are very odd. They're very strange. They are over the top. They have exaggerated emotional reactions. And they all have these very grotesque, not only depictions, but these grotesque quirks and characteristics which define them. For instance, there are these twin sisters who are constantly repeating each other. Similarly, there is a doctor who constantly laughs at very kind of inopportune times. And times when people really shouldn't be laughing, he's constantly laughing mid-sentence. And each one of these characters kind of has a quirk similar to that. And because of their goofiness, because of this sense of grotesqueness that surrounds their depiction, I think it might be easy for readers to kind of gloss over that and kind of treat it as if like those characters can't be taken seriously. And I think that is a grave mistake, because I think that Mervyn Peake's characters in Castle Gormenghast are more realistic than his characters outside, which fit a little more neatly into kind of traditional fantasy tropes. His characters in Gormenghast Castle are astonishingly real. They deal with familial estrangement, loveless marriages, these kind of very petty, vindictive, murderous rivalries between each other. And yet it's kind of like painted over with this almost exaggeration, this grotesqueness. And the fact that he's able to characterize people that way is supremely fascinating to me, and I've never seen characters presented in that way before, where you're almost tricked or deceived almost like into believing that these characters are goofballs, that they can't be taken seriously, when in reality they're more realistic than the characters who are occupying the space outside of Gormenghast Castle. Ultimately, I think that Mervyn Peake, in terms of what he was trying to accomplish, in terms of his intention, accomplished what he wanted to. And if I was rating it just on that, I would no doubt give it a 10 out of 10. But I'm also rating it on enjoyment, and I see every bit of genius that's woven into this work. At the same time, it was really hard to get through, and I don't think I'll be reading it again. But this was a masterpiece that I am going to give a 7.5 out of 10. The second book is The Dreaming City by Michael Moorcock. It is, as far as I can tell, the first book of the Elric saga. And I've been hearing about Michael Moorcock for a while now. And I was kind of excited to dive into his book. The Dreaming City is about Elric, who is the last emperor of a very powerful city-state. It kind of reminded me of like Tenochtitlan from like Aztec, because it's kind of like on this island, and it's surrounded by these tributary states. And Elric is this emperor of this very powerful city-state, but it is kind of weakening. It's kind of on the decline, and he is not really the emperor to kind of deal with it. For one thing, he's kind of physically ill. He needs a lot of drugs to live. And for another, he has a moral conscience, which is not very helpful with his current circumstances. And a lot of his nobles also view his moral conscience as a weakness. They overthrow him, and they install somebody else in his place. And Elric is kind of saved from that via a deal with the Chaos Gods, and that's all in the beginning of the book. That's all I'm going to say. But the prose of this book were underwhelming. They were rudimentary. They used a lot of passive voice, very little complexity to them, and very little sense of like, oh, this is an authorial style. Much more just ideas kind of blurted out, kind of a very Sandersonian approach, although I would say that Sanderson's work is quite a bit better than, in terms of its prose, than Michael Moorcock's is. But that was underwhelming. I kind of knew that going into it, but it did not, unfortunately, like, lessen the disappointment. Whenever I'm reading something, I'm very interested in complex prose and interesting ways to say things. And I think Gormenghast did a great job of that, whereas I feel that Elric did a lot less good job of that. But the plot is pretty predictable. It's kind of exactly what I think it should be. It's exactly what I thought was going to happen. Likewise, the side characters, are pretty shallow. There's very little complexity to them. There's this antagonistic guy, and his whole motivation is that he wants power, and that's like his motivation. And then there's a love interest who acts kind of exactly how you think a love interest is going to act. There's this general character who is like Elric's chief general, and he kind of has a little bit of a moral dilemma, when Elric gets overthrown and stuff, and there's a little bit there, but not really too much. And then there's kind of this sidekick character near the end. The saving grace of the characters, though, would be Elric himself. There's not too much happened in this book yet. It's very small. It's this very short novella. There's not much that happened yet, but there is some seeds, I would say, of things that are going to happen. Things like shame, things like an exploration of guilt, things like the inevitability of fate and destiny, which seems to be kind of some thematic exploration going on there. But Elric shows promise of being kind of like a morally complex, morally gray character. And so in future entries, I kind of hope to see that begin to blossom from the seeds that were planted here. One other big saving grace of this book was its world building. In its world building, I was recognizing different world-building concepts from books 30, 40 years later. The Mirror of Draconis, or sorry, the Mirror of Memories in Elric was reminding me a great deal of Draconis' sword in Malazan, in terms of its conceptual and philosophical thematic roots. Similarly, the ship that sails over land and sea in Elric was reminding me a great deal of the Live Ship Traders by Robin Hobb and the live ships in that series. And I could see definitely a lot of inspiration throughout Elric, the Dreaming City, that I could apply to different fantasy series that came a lot later. But the other thing about its world building was that I am used to like these big old fantasy novels that are like this big, 1,000 pages or more. And there's a lot of freedom there to do a ton of world building. But Michael Moorcock has a novel that's like this big. And it's like, I don't even know, like 120, 130 pages. And his world building there is in these kind of like short blips that come across. Like there's like the 10 pages dedicated to world building concept, and then you move on. And that is a fascinating way to do world building that I haven't quite seen before. The ship that sails over land and sea, it's there very quickly, and then it's just gone. But yeah, there's some concepts with like eldritch, almost like Lovecraftian deities and stuff like that. Definitely a big saving grace of the book. But all around, I think I'm gonna give Dreaming City a 5 out of 10. I didn't dislike it. I didn't hate it. Certainly wasn't a masterpiece either. But it's also the other thing about it was that I read both it and Titus Grown about like a month ago. I finished both of them. And Titus Grown has been just pulsing in my head since then. Just a lot of thought given to how Peake characterizes people, and a lot of kind of just study of the prose and stuff like that. But Dreaming City is kind of very quickly just fading from memory. And if I'm not thinking about something after I read it, I just kind of... It's a 5 out of 10. It's a 5 out of 10, and I do plan on reading a little further, giving it a second, third, fourth, even like fifth chance, because I think there is some roots there for some good ideas, good evolution of character, good development of world building, and the complexity of Elric's situation and thematic complexity as well. But it just kind of isn't there just yet. This book almost felt like a prologue. But anyway, that's all. This is my first video. I think that I'm going to be making another one in the next weeks, definitely. And I look forward to seeing you guys there. But yeah, see you.